Um, Hello, COSMA 2021 attendees. You're in for a real treat with this panel presentation. We've got 5 individuals here today to talk about the road to a job in higher education. They all have administrative responsibilities and faculty and teaching responsibilities and a lot of years of experience. And they're going to help you navigate the ins and outs of a career in higher education. So if you are a student, if you are already in higher ed, if you're in sport industry and are looking to change, you're going to get some great guidance today. So what does it take to work in higher education? How does one literally apply for and negotiate a job? These topics and others will be addressed today. So I'm going to start first with Dr. Jennifer Kane from the University of North Florida. She's going to introduce herself and everyone else on the panel will do the same.
Hi, thanks, Heather. I'm Jennifer Kane. I'm the Associate Dean and I'm a Professor of Sport Management at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, Florida. And I have been an Associate Dean now for the past 6 years. So before that, I served in a chair position, so have had quite a bit of experience serving on committees, interviewing candidates, and helping our dean negotiate for faculty positions. Clay, do you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Clay Stolt. I am the interim dean of the College of Applied Studies at Wichita State University. Prior to my current interim appointment, I was in an associate dean role for 7 years and then also spent 7 years as a department chair prior to that, professor in sport management. Jennifer, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Clay. I'm Jennifer Van Sickle. I'm at the University of Indianapolis, where I've been for 16 years. I'm a full professor now and program director for both our undergraduate program, sport management, and our master's program in sport management. All right, Damon, your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Damon Andrew. I'm the Dean of the College of Education at Florida State University and have been in that role for 3 years. Prior to that, I was Dean of the College of Human Sciences and Education at LSU and Dean of the College of Health and Human Services at Troy University, 2 universities with COSMA accredited programs. Happy to be here today. Mark?
All right. How you doing? My name is Mark Vermillion. I am the interim associate dean for the College of Applied Studies here at Wichita State. I'm also the department chair for the sport management department where I'm a professor. And I'm also the program director for a new degree program here at Wichita State, Workforce Leadership and Applied Learning. Basically, I've just been following Clay everywhere. So his 7 years in one position, I was 7 years in the previous position. When he moved to associate dean, I became department chair. As he's moved to dean, I've become associate dean. So happy to help however we can today.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Jennifer Kane is going to start off with a little bit of soul searching.
So this is an interesting one probably to most people, but the reason we chose this topic was that question everybody gets asked, and that is why are you interested in this position? And it's been interesting over the years that some people have an easy time answering that question, and some people get stuck on it. And so you're not really sure they've thought about why they really want the position at your institution. So some of the things I've just over the years thought about was to make sure people think through what your strengths are, what your passions are, and have some evidence to support that when you're asked that question. So if you say that you're interested in the University of North Florida, for instance, I want to hear that you know what type of institution we are, and that you've really thought that this is a good fit for what our research requirements are, what our teaching requirements are, that you have looked into the environment, the type of weather we have, for example, the sport that surrounds us, is the number of faculty that are in the department, because it's different to have 1 sport management faculty colleague and 4 sport management faculty colleagues. So for me, it's really thinking through, is this the type of culture? Is this the type of institution that fits really what you want to do? If you really don't enjoy research, then you don't want to be at a Research One institution. It has to be a passion. It has to be something you really, really like, or you're going to find yourself very miserable and pretty soon be looking for a move. So this topic was just designed to get folks to think through really doing your research about that institution and thinking about for yourself what's going to make you happy. Other people may want to join that topic and talk about their experiences as well.
Yeah, Jennifer, I'll jump in here. I was at Morehead State University before I came to the University of Indianapolis, and location can be a very important part of what you're doing in sport management. Morehead State's a Division I institution, 11,000 students or so, but there was nothing there but the university for students to be involved in. And so if you're somebody who wants maybe a lot of community involvement, or you're looking for service learning projects or community projects, Morehead was not the place to be. However, now here at the University of Indianapolis, I'm in one of the best places, I think, in the country for sport and sport management, and to be able to have guest speakers, to be able to have students to go out and get volunteer opportunities very easily, to be involved with the community and community organization, community projects is important to me. And that's why Indianapolis is a great fit for me. I think you're right in that instance of not only just looking at what you want, but also looking at what's in the surrounding community, what you'd like to have for yourself and for your students.
Something I'll add that I think is an overarching consideration that we'll probably touch on a few times as we move through these questions too is, in the vein of soul searching, and, hopefully that process has started well before you get to the point of actually making applications. Another really key question is, what is your brand? And what is the sum of the experiences, the skills, the interests that you would bring to a position? And as you're looking at some of those things that Jennifer and Jennifer both mentioned, what is the fit between your brand and the brand of the institution or the program that you may be considering applying for?
And I started to say this, I don't know if I finished, but having evidence of that is really, it's critical too. So I've interviewed some folks who've come out of Research One institutions who, as a part of their curriculum, they've been asked to do and do scholarly agendas. So they bring to the table evidence that they have thought through their scholarship, they've thought through long-term what their scholarly interests are, and that they have a plan. And so that little piece of evidence shows if they're talking about their passion and their interest in research, that they've thought through that they've thought through what that looks like, what that means. And if teaching is your interest, talk about curriculum development, talk about the things that really make you happy, and projects that have the outcomes and how that's made you feel, and what you get from those experiences. So even just having that little bit of evidence, not just saying it, but having something there to back that up is really important too.
All right, what about the job description? What should a candidate look for? How do they know how to interpret it? Anybody?
I'll just start again. Listen, some people seem to ignore it, don't act like they haven't read it, which is a problem. So when I know at the University of North Florida, we put a lot of time into that job description, as I'm sure our panel members could attest, that job description really outlines the type of person we're looking for. So when you're reading that job description, your brain should go to, again, I'll go back to that evidence. How do I show that I'm a good fit and I'm a good candidate for the things that this institution is looking for in this position? So if there's a mention of someone who has experience with, let's say, accreditation, right? That would be a place where you would want to be able to show that you've been to COSMA, that you've been in COSMA training for accreditation, that you've been through that process. Even as a faculty member, you've had to provide evidence, you've been through a site visit. So make sure that, again, you've read it and you know what they're looking for, and that you're able to match your skill sets to those things that they're looking for.
Yeah, I might add on just a little bit to that. when you look at the job description, Jennifer, as you were saying, a lot of people spend a lot of time, effort, and energy putting these together. So sometimes I think kind of blending some of the first things we've spoken about in terms of soul searching and research, as you're looking at that job description, you see the things and you see the type of institution that this job is going to be associated with. Think about the context, right? So think about the context of where that particular job is going to be embedded, the type of department, the type of college, and those types of things. And that's always going to be again, a reoccurring thing. But if you're able to connect the context, the job description, kind of the myopic sort of granular elements of that particular job with, as some of the other folks were saying on this panel, in terms of your personal branding or what it is that you want to do in terms of your long-term goals, then what you're able to do is, as you start submitting those materials, you're able to identify that you understand what people are looking for. You're able to show that attention to detail, but then also tell a holistic story so that the folks that are on that evaluation committee are really able to get a sense for how you as an individual can really bring to bear your strengths to this particular job and the context for the department.
Can somebody talk about the differences between the minimum requirements and the preferred requirements in a job description?
So the way we do that is the required, that we have a set of required qualifications, and that means there's absolutely zero flexibility that we're allowed to make with these particular criteria. So if it says that you have to have an earned doctorate in a particular field, sport management or related, that means that we cannot hire somebody who's ABD. We have to have somebody who has the earned degree. Those are really, they're federally mandated, they're audited, there's no give on those things. Those preferred qualifications, on the other hand, are things where we do have a little bit of a place to differentiate the candidates. So if we keep the folks who meet the minimum, then we now look at the preferred qualifications to really take a look at the person who is the best fit. So we kind of start eliminating people based on the minimum, and then we move to the preferred, and we can start then narrowing down the pool in that way. So the more of the preferred that you meet, the better qualified you are for the position.
Yeah. Anyone else have any comments about that? If not, can you talk about submitting your materials, what generally different programs and institutions are looking for, and how to put that together?
I'll speak to that because the University of Indianapolis is a small teaching institution. So oftentimes one of the things that we ask for that you may not see, especially at Research One institutions, is a teaching philosophy, right? That's very important to us because we're a primarily teaching institution. Well, that doesn't mean you don't have to do scholarship and other things, but we're looking, that's important to what we have. So don't ignore that piece of it. If it asks for a teaching philosophy, again, take the time, as others have said, figure out what your brand is and how that fits with what you want to do in the soul searching piece. But then also, how do you articulate that so that you let that institution know that you are passionate about teaching, and here are some methods that you use to go about to bring learning and discovery into your classroom.
Is there?
I would add.
Go ahead.
I would just add that I am most impressed by candidates who have really tailored their cover letters to the position and the specific preferred and required elements of the position. If a position may also have some type of administrative requirements as well, they may identify some challenges and opportunities. And to the extent to which that the candidate has clearly made a persuasive case that they have the background and skills and abilities that are going to help the program meet those needs, that's very impressive. I know it's tempting sometimes to just come up with a standard cover letter. I am interested in insert position name at insert university name here, but I think the candidates that truly stand out are the ones that can really have shown that they have studied the position, studied the opportunity, and they have made a compelling case that there is a good organization person fit if they were to come forward and interview for the position and ultimately be offered it.
And just to add to that, Damon, proofread. If you use the same one, please proofread it. You know, we're UNF, and you would be amazed how many times I see UF. They haven't changed the institution name, and I can tell you that committee members immediately are turned off by that. That this person hasn't even taken the time to make sure they've proofread their materials to see that they've made that change. And again, I agree with Damon. It should be tailored to the institution and to that particular job description. But the very least, if you're going to use the same one, proofread it, make sure you have the right institution in the letter.
I might follow up on that to say that sometimes there's opportunities to customize your CV as well. So if you're applying to an institution that is teaching focused, maybe that's the material that you want to bring to the top of your CV so that it's the first thing that the committee members see. Also, maybe just a quick follow-up or two to Jennifer's comment about asking for a teaching philosophy. Whether it's a teaching statement or a diversity, equity, inclusion statement of some kind or another, those can be valuable exercises to craft those documents, even if the program, the institution you're applying to doesn't require them, because it helps you walk through the thought process associated with those key topics. And those are things that you'll likely be asked about down the road. And it's also, I think, preferable in those statements to really be able to offer something that's concrete, so that you're not just talking about teaching from a philosophical perspective. Talk about what you have done in your teaching to embrace that philosophy and to actually activate it. So there's some additional steps you can take to really leverage the value of those particular elements.
Clay, I think those are excellent comments, and I'll just add a couple more to that. In the job description, if you see then that they're asking that you want to teach the specific course, right, or have expertise in specific areas, maybe it be marketing or maybe it be legal issues, whatever it is, that, like Clay said, tailor your resume to that. If you've taught those courses in the past, make sure that in your CV, right, you're putting those courses there that you've taught, and an opportunity then to explain more in your cover letter and your teaching philosophy of how you did in those classes, or teaching evaluations, maybe, or other materials that you could submit, not just the CV and the teaching philosophy, but maybe you include those as well, to show that you really do have an expertise in that area.
So we can touch back on this topic as we go further. How does a person prepare for the first round of interviews? So clearly there's more than one round, and right now things are happening differently than maybe they did last year. Things are happening virtually. So I'd like you to talk on multiple levels here about now you've submitted your materials and you're getting that call so that you can have that first round interview. How do you prepare for that?
I think there are some of the basic things, you know, that a lot of people are always familiar with, but that's, you know, managing your environment as much as possible. You know, trying to prepare and realizing that, you know, whether it's a phone interview or video chat kind of initial interview, oftentimes there potentially could be a large number of those. So you need to be rather succinct and kind of parsimonious. I mean, explain in detail everything that you need, but you need to be prepared in the sense so that you're not stumbling around or trying to find the exact wording for different questions and things like that. That's always helpful.
And I'll add a lot of, you know, again, especially if it's a phone interview. So the phone is hard, right? So it's hard to read affect. So it's hard to really, to know if somebody is just by nature a happy person, or they have enthusiasm for what they're talking about. So I think sometimes you have to practice that, and you have to really make sure, you know, have somebody sit and listen to your responses and see if there is, they can read that level of enthusiasm, because that's all the committee has is your voice. And so it's really important. I mean, I've had candidates who I've known personally, and the committee saying, well, they really didn't sound very happy or very enthusiastic. I'm like, no, but that's really not them. I know them. I know they are, but they weren't really good at making that, making the committee aware of their personality and their enthusiasm. So I think practice with a friend, a spouse, whoever it is, to make sure that you're projecting appropriately what you're actually feeling and the way that you want to come across to a committee of people sitting around a table.
I think notes can also be helpful, whether it's a telephone or a Zoom interview. Maybe even just writing down a few keywords along the way to help keep you on topic as you're responding to questions. And I think the other place where notes can really be helpful is with names. If it's a Zoom interview and we're fortunate that everyone's name is posted, that makes things a little bit easier. But I think we've probably all been on Zoom when somebody has like a phone number or an ID number in place of their nameplate there. So just in a sense of being able to kind of keep track of who you're speaking with, those notes, even if they're not extensive, even if they're just some key points along the way, can really be helpful.
I'll add one last detail, but this has been an experience we've had. Make sure you know the time zone when the call is going to happen or when the Zoom interview is going to happen. We called a gentleman one time and he was on the golf course, right? And we had thought we had made it very clear, right, in our communication that this is what time we were going to call. So it sounds like a silly thing, but can make a big difference whether or not you're prepared. Clay makes some great points about names, right? Writing them down, calling people by names, that is always very important. But that final point that was made previously, know how much time you have for the call and being succinct, especially when the calls are very short. They may only be 30 minutes. Being succinct can also be very important.
I'll just add one last thing. Just as I looked at my notes, I wanted to say that to remember that this is a two-way interview. They're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. And we often forget about that. So it's always suspect to me when the candidate doesn't have any questions for the committee. The committee finishes and they say, okay, we've saved 10 minutes for question and answer. And the candidate says, no, I'm good. I don't have any questions. How could that be? Like, how could you not have any questions for such a really important interview? Like this is your time to ask questions. Make sure, again, you're looking for fit. It's a fit both ways. So I would encourage you to think through, have some questions written down so that you're able to, to take that time that you're given to ask the committee questions as well.
As people who have sat on probably many of these committees, is there any kind of follow-up you're expecting or hoping for from a candidate after this first round?
I think it's always good form for the candidate at each stage of the process to, as they're keeping track of all the individuals who are participating in the interview process, send them either an email or a handwritten thank you note is one way to really catch their attention. And I would recommend doing that at each stage of the process, the first round of interviews, the finalist interviews, and then even if you're ultimately offered the position you accept, I would recommend also sending around, because you're setting the tone for what your first year on the position is going to be like. I think adopting an attitude of gratitude is very important.
Well, feel free to just chime in on any other thoughts you have about that. But let's say that the candidate has now been, or is going to be brought to campus and is going to be interviewed in person for a second round. Can you talk about what that looks like? Actually, if that in-person interview process is happening at this time, and what kinds of things a candidate should be keeping in mind as they meet the committee and are really up for potentially getting the position.
So on-campus interviews are not happening at my institution right now. I'm assuming that would be the same just with so many travel restrictions. So we have moved to, the final interviews are also through Zoom. We've had success with it, but it's not without challenge, of course. Because obviously you are limited in what you can see and really how well you can get to know a person, but nonetheless, it's where we are. So you put your best foot forward and you prepare and make sure again that you've done all that you can do to present yourself well in that way. But with the, I'm going to start just briefly with when that begins, and that typically begins with an office assistant, with an administrative assistant or someone who has contacted you to make travel arrangements, if indeed when we go back to traveling. And I can't stress the importance of how one must be professional and respectful of their attitude with that person who's helping them with travel arrangements. We take that very seriously. So if that person is being rude to an office staff member, hard to work with, being extremely picky about flights or accommodations or any of those things along the way, our office staff know to let us know. We asked very specifically their feedback on how cooperative they were in that process. And so I can't stress enough, that shows something about your character and that you're treating everyone with respect. And so that, that's something that people sometimes overlook and forget about.
That's a great point, Jennifer. Going back to the potential for Zoom interviews, we aren't doing any hiring right now, so we haven't done this. But if your final interview is via Zoom, you have the opportunity to ask also to see or talk to certain people, right? Even whether it's face-to-face or Zoom. So if you'd like to meet with some students to find out more about them, ask them. You should get a copy of the schedule in advance. And if you don't, ask for one. So what's the schedule going to be like for the day? What are the expectations for me? Is it a teaching presentation? Is it a research presentation? Am I going to meet the dean? Am I going to meet the provost? Right? Ask for that. If you don't get it, find out what that's going to be. And if there's somebody on the list that you'd like to talk to that you don't see, ask for that as well. Right? Ask to talk to the students. Find out what it's like. Remember, you're interviewing them as well. So ask to talk to them. What's it like for them? Ask to talk to just the faculty, maybe without the department chair. Find out how they like working there and try to figure out whether or not you want to work with them. It's okay to ask. And sometimes, again, if you're willing to ask for those things, that says something about you as a candidate, not only about your interest level, but also what you might bring to the table in that job.
I think that's a really important point, Jennifer, because one of the things that is really critical at this phase in the process for the candidate is to try to get a read on the organization, the climate, the culture within that organization. And that's something that is always a challenge. If you're interviewing in person, I think you certainly have more opportunities to tap into that than you would if it's a set of virtual interviews. So being able to drill down into the itinerary or to ask for some of those additional conversations that may assist you in evaluating that is really important, because the climate, the culture will significantly impact your satisfaction in whatever position you wind up landing.
Well, again, you can continue to comment about that part of the process, but I will say, let's pretend I'm receiving an offer from an institution. What am I looking for? What does it look like? What pieces are there in place? And how do I negotiate with that? What are some of the things I can ask for, and in what way?
Well, I think one thing that's good a fair question to ask as you're finishing up the finalist interview, you're in the final round, is something simple like, what is your timeline for selecting a preferred candidate? Just an open-ended question like that. Sometimes their response might tell you the total number of finalists that are being considered for the candidate, how many finalists have interviewed and how many are still to interview. And they may give you an idea of a typical timeline of how long it takes the dean's office or human resources to approve an offer once a preferred finalist is identified, because that's going to impact what you're willing to negotiate, what you're going to be able to negotiate for. If you receive an offer soon after all interviews are completed, you're likely the preferred candidate. You've demonstrated good fit for the position, and this is the best case scenario for you from a negotiation perspective. But your ultimate leverage is going to depend upon how much stronger you are than the next most qualified candidate. If there's a huge gap and they might have to close the search if they don't hire you, then you're in a very good negotiation position. If it's a very narrow gap and it was a nearly split vote, then you may not be in that type of a situation. But once you get into, some universities will tender an initial offer in writing. Most of them just handle that verbally, and they'll talk about whether it's a 9, 10, 12-month offer, the salary, the title, whether it's tenure track, basic elements of maybe a startup or transition package that they would give to everyone. And then the remainder of that, you've got to work with them to figure out what are the negotiables. So salary discussions, maybe some travel and professional development funding, startup money, moving cost coverage, whether or not there's any flexibility with insurance packages, years towards tenure, research expectations, spousal support, things like that could all be on the table depending upon the position. I generally find that the higher level the position it is, if it's a full professor position, you might be able to get some of the things like spousal support and a dual hire type situation, or if it's an administrative position. If it's a first level, entry level position coming right out of a doctoral program, sometimes it's harder to get things like a position for your spouse as well, because in many cases, the college that's trying to hire you, in order to hire that spouse, has to make an arrangement with another college. And depending upon how the university, I've worked at universities where I had to provide 2/3 of the salary of the trailing spouse, even though that person was working in another college. I've worked at universities where I've had to provide 100% of that. And I've worked at universities where maybe the provost office provides a couple of years of temporary funding to let that happen, and then 100% of that responsibility fell on the way to the college that was making the initial hire. So you have to be careful when considering all those different factors.
Yeah, I'll just add to that from my university's standpoint. This is, just so that, most people may or may not know this, but this really is the one and only time you get to negotiate. So once you accept this position at this institution, more than likely, this will be the last chance you have to negotiate. So I didn't do that. That was 20 years ago. Young, naive me did not do that. I accepted the salary that was offered to me. But now I think there is just more, you see this more with this current generation that they're coming up. They're a little bit more savvy about negotiations. And so make sure you're thinking through all of these things and asking for things and trying to figure out what is in reason and what is not. But I do want to say there is a fine line where it does become a detriment to continue with those negotiations. And as Damon said, I think a lot of that depends on whether there's another candidate pushing right underneath you that you go, forget it. This is high maintenance. This person's going to just keep pushing and we're never going to be able to please them when we get them on board. So we're going to move on to the next candidate. So it's a fine line between asking for what you want and getting what you can versus pushing that limit and being, just being annoying, for a lack of better words, and really pushing the wrong buttons.
Jen makes a great point. And I think to get the most out of any negotiation, you have to look at it from all viewpoints of the negotiation. So if you want to come in and start arguing or making the case for a workload modification, perhaps you want a reduced teaching load for your first year or two in exchange for increased research expectations. Keep in mind the type of institution that you're interviewing for. If you're interviewing at a teaching institution that's in a small remote place where adjunct availability is extremely limited, you're really putting that department chair in a tough position. Maybe they don't have adjuncts who can teach sport law that are local to be able to teach that, and they need you to teach that. That's part of the reason why they have that position. If you start negotiating for teaching load reductions, it also raises the question of, well, if you're really wanting to get out of teaching, are you really a good fit at a teaching focused institution? So all of those things I think you have to keep in mind. Ultimately, you know, when you come down to the final notes on negotiation, you want to be reasonable. Before you even go into to the negotiation, go ahead and prioritize your negotiables in advance of the negotiation and know which of those elements are must-haves for you versus which of those are kind of nice-to-haves in advance. And because the tone you set during your negotiation could impact whether you receive a final offer. As Jen mentioned, you can sometimes walk away. I tend to prefer to let the chairs do the initial negotiation and conversations at the outset, just in case either the candidate or the chair backs themselves into a corner that they can't really come back from. Then there's still the opportunity for the dean to step in and intercede at some point, but you got to be careful about that. And then certainly when you get to a final conclusion, try to get all those negotiables in writing. Sometimes it may come in the form of two different, you may have a standard contract that the university requires that has your basic elements, and then maybe another memorandum that includes some specific negotiables that you had, but get both of those in writing and get both of those signed. That's in the best interest of both parties, because that chair that you're negotiating with right now may not be the chair when you start the position the next year. And you want to make sure that you have all those negotiables in writing.
So true and so important, especially on things such as Damon mentioned, changes in your typical teaching load or research responsibility. Because again, chairs change, deans change, but if you have that written into your contract, then it doesn't matter who's in the lead. That is, that's something you've had in writing and into your contract. Years that are being transferred in or accepted toward tenure, another very important place to make sure you get that in writing. Yes, it's just, this is a really important time in this whole process. And so I spend a lot of time on this, and it doesn't help, it doesn't hurt to get a good mentor. To talk to somebody who's been through this before, who may be an administrator at another or a like size institution, so they know what is reasonable and what is not reasonable if this is your first time doing it. So you know what you're doing when you're going into that process.
Well, I'd like you to conclude this panel by talking very specifically about your own personal experience, both looking for jobs and then also on those committees hiring people. What are some of the most important qualities that you look for in a candidate? And how would they demonstrate that, especially in this virtual environment? So everyone, I want to do a round robin here to end.
I know a lot of universities and deans may fall for the trap of just trying to hire the thickest CV. I try to hire a good person who's a good person on the inside that I know that is going to be a good university citizen that's going to work well with others. Unfortunately, sometimes, the thickest CVs have become that thick for a reason. Maybe those individuals have been very selfish in their approach to academia. And they're not necessarily good team members. And so it's important to make sure that you hire in respect of the entire team and how that individual is going to have an impact on others around them. I also try to look for evidence, and if they've worked at a few institutions, I can look at evidence of how they've kind of come into a university and whether or not they've been able to elevate and collaborate with their colleagues in terms of their work together and what they've been able to do as a group. If they're sending me strong signals that they play well with others, that's a good sign on the front end. It's a whole lot harder to try to teach someone to play nice with others who hasn't shown the ability to do it than it is to just hire somebody who knows that I can teach them how to run an ANOVA or structural equation model, or they can continue to learn those other factors that they're going to need to be successful at the university.
Definitely agree with that, Damon, 100%. And, I'll just add to that. The role of a faculty member has changed and evolved And you know, there's growing demands on faculty. And so I look for somebody who really understands that. I mean, the role of a faculty member isn't the 75-25 or the 50-50 split as it used to be. I mean, a faculty member now is participating in recruitment. They're participating in promotion of their program. They're doing outreach into the community. You know, they're doing open houses, and you know, it's the role of a faculty member has changed. And I always look for somebody who understands that, buys into that and the importance of that. And it's not just what I'm teaching and my research, it's what's best for the program, what's best for the college, what's best for the university and the university mission. And they understand what that university mission is. And, you know, I do a lot of charges for committees. And the last thing I say, just, you know, as Damon mentions, I always end it with hire somebody kind, hire a good heart. It goes a long way. And they are typically student-centered, they're collaborative. You can teach a lot of things, but there are some things you just can't teach. And I think kindness tends to be one of those.
That's great advice, Jennifer. You know, we've been mentioning it since the beginning too, is the fit piece. University of Indianapolis is a small private institution. Students are paying a lot to go here. They're coming because they know that they can get the individual attention. They know that they can stop by the office, have office hours. They know that we are student-centered. And so we need faculty members who care about teaching, who care about the students, who can also fulfill the other roles of service and scholarship. Those aren't out the door, but this is where our main priority is. So as a candidate, you want to figure out what is the main priority of that institution? What is the mission and how are they fulfilling that? And then, and again, how do you fit that? The other thing that we're looking for, that we look for when we look at candidates is, as Jennifer mentioned before, do they ask questions, and what are the type of questions that they're asking? And one thing I will say to those looking for a job that I think is really important is pay attention to the questions that they are asking you, because that is telling you a lot about what they are looking for, or perhaps it's telling you what some of the issues might be in that department or on that campus or in that institution. So really pay attention to the questions that they're asking you. Think about them and how they fit with your philosophy or what you're looking for in a position. Don't be afraid to follow up. If you get something that puzzles you, don't be afraid to follow up on that particular question. But know the type of university that they are, know who you are and what you want.
And one of the things I might say from kind of putting on my chair hat would be, and people have talked about, you know, the team orientation and things like that, because you do have usually an established organizational culture that you are adding new pieces and new personalities to. So that's a huge part of the decision that you make. And a lot of that's, you know, really borne out by the fact that, you know, as y'all were talking about, you know, the expanded workload of what a faculty member is, and they're involved in so many different things. So obviously collaboration is going to be key and really at the heart of it. But something you know, as I was kind of taking little notes as you asked the question, Heather, and one of the things that I like to look for is just enthusiasm. We've had some folks that, you know, were great, and, you know, Damon, to your point, you know, they had a really, really strong, you know, curriculum vitae and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, during the process, it didn't sound like they enjoyed working with students. You know, they were, and I don't know if that was, you know, just kind of trying to sort of relate to other folks on the committee or whatever, but, you know, show that you enjoy your job. You enjoy this occupation. You enjoy working with practitioners. You enjoy working with students, you know, all across, you know, a diverse spectrum of student experiences. You know, talk about, you know, what excites you about this position. You know, talk about whether it's, you know, the institution, you know, even things, you know, Jennifer, you were talking about weather. As we sit here, it's 29 degrees and I'm, you know, freezing. You know, all of these things, quality of life, that's a holistic, you know, thing to address. And the occupation, the job is part of it. And being able to convey that to the people, that's always something I found to be very, it really shows how authentic and genuine people can be. Whether, you know, again, whether it's through Zoom or in person on the phone, those things can really translate. And then finally, because of the nature of, you know, organizations and bringing new parts in, and maybe faculty that have been here for a long time and maybe have salary compression and things like that, some grace, you know, kind of a nuanced, deft touch in terms of dealing with people, being able to understand that, you know, you want to contribute to the culture. you want to be your own person as well, but you don't necessarily want to make it all about you. You know, that it's kind of being able to find those dynamics. So those are some things that have been kind of important for us as we move forward.
Wow, it does not pay to go last on this particular question because there's been so many great points that have already been made. I would certainly underscore all of those as being highly relevant. And you know, I think a theme that hopefully you've heard kind of woven in a number of the responses that we've offered today is that, you know, while you may be applying for a position that you're hoping to secure, and along the way you're hoping to present the information that the hiring institution wants to see, and that you're, you know, answering questions in such a way that you know, that you're moving to the top of the list of applicants for the position. But you know, just to maybe go back to my earlier point about what is your brand, people are very quickly attuned to brands that try to present themselves in non-authentic ways. Make sure that you are authentic to who you are as you move through this process, because ultimately what we're talking about here is establishing a long-term relationship between the institution and the new hire. And so again, to get to that theme of fit, you really want to make sure that genuinely the fit is there so that it can be a successful and an effective relationship for all.
Thank you so much for that, and for everybody for contributing to this excellent panel. I think it's going to be of great value to those who are watching. So to you that are watching, make sure to attend the Q&A session that will be live so you can get your very specific questions answered by this fine panel of folks. Thank you very much, and look for them also giving some other presentations during this conference.
Not about the presentation in general, but just in general.
Anything
And
you want. Yep.
I should probably state for the record with two of my bosses in the room here that I am not looking for a position, but I have many friends that are.
That's funny.
I'm curious. So our institution has adopted the Uniscope model in terms of the tenure process. And I'm curious if you all have some insight on how folks who are looking for a job at this point better tell their story of what they have accomplished up to this point, or what they hope to accomplish in the future, with the fact that not every institution across the board has adopted that model of practice in terms of evaluation of faculty. How do we go about better telling a broader story if that other institution is not necessarily on the same page with the adoption of that model?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the model, so I'm not able to really add to that. So maybe one of the other panelists are familiar. I'd love to hear about it though. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a model that I think was originally developed at Penn State, and we adopted it a number of years ago as university leadership was looking for ways that we could deepen our engagement and connections to the community, to build partnerships, and to bring to our faculty the opportunity to get credit for the full range of activities that they could engage in that actually, you know, move the needle in some facet or another. So, you know, I think prior to that, we were pretty traditional in terms of our annual reviews and our T&P process in terms of kind of very structured categories. You know, these are your refereed publications and presentations and so forth. And there were just gaps there where we knew people were doing important work, but it was sometimes hard for them to make the case for that. So the Uniscope model provides a much broader and integrated framework. And what it allows our faculty to do is to really tell the story about how what they are doing is indeed making a difference in some facet or another in regard to the university's strategic priorities.
Yeah, the one thing I might add with that is it's about impact. So it was really, WSU trying to quantify a faculty member's impact. So one of the examples they gave was maybe a political scientist who wrote a blog that was, seen by 150,000 people, maybe during a political race. What type of impact does that have compared to a refereed publication that maybe has 7 citations, while not impugning one or the other, really trying to highlight that faculty can be impactful in a variety of different ways. And so I think what Mike's really asking is, that storytelling component of how can you tell your story as an individual if you're in a system that focuses on one system, whether it's Uniscope or not, but you're applying for a position that focuses on the other system, whether it's Uniscope or not. And the way that it was explained to us is that the traditional 40-40-20 will always be accepted within the Uniscope model. And the Uniscope model, really the Boyer model, is really just trying to heighten the impact of, or really try to describe the impact that faculty have. So you have 4 dimensions of knowledge that are going to be sort of cross-referenced with the dimensions of scholarship. So teaching, research, service, and then you have the dimensions of knowledge like integration, application, education, etc. So it's really about just kind of slotting all of your work into that different matrix, which is broadened. And I think the biggest thing there is, faculty, as they have their research program, maybe as they're transitioning from a doctoral program onto the market, they have their research track that they're beginning, but also think about the importance of teaching, or depending on the school, maybe you're going to be involved in advising. So how do you measure the impact of intrusive advising and things like that? And that's kind of what the storytelling is. The Uniscope is just simply there to help that process, but it really goes about, in that cover letter as you're applying, and then eventually once you get those interviews, what's your holistic impact on your students, on the practitioner partners, on the academic community, on your professional colleagues, et cetera.
So Mike, I would say, at FSU, was not familiar with the Uniscope model until you just mentioned it. We have had some discussions about alt metrics and for evaluation of faculty, and so there it's similar, I think, in terms of trying to figure out scope and impact of work beyond citation rates and impact factors and so forth like that. And I think that there are a few universities that I've seen. I did an external review for NC State a few years back, and it was interesting to see, they do 4 legs to the tenure stool: teaching, research, service, and engagement. And that 4th piece of engagement actually can be something that you layer your teaching, research, and service in, but you basically have to show that your teaching, research, and service is happening in a way that is engaging the citizens of North Carolina and making a big difference. I actually thought that was a brilliant way to characterize it. And I've been impressed with the candidates that I've reviewed from NC State and how they have really shaped their work in a way to show that it has practical application and meaning in the state. And I can imagine at the senior level of administration, how much easier it is for them to click a button, and whether they're using digital measures or some other type of software program to capture all of this engagement data, but then pull it up and even maybe classify it by county and say, Jackson County over here, here's our impact. We have this many teachers that we prepared that are serving in the state. We have this many agriculture extension programs that are available here. Our arts and drama program had this many performances that involve this state, or incredible way then to be able to go back and communicate to the legislature that when you cut NC State from funding, you're actually cutting the entire state of North Carolina. It's a brilliant concept. And so I understand probably why it's there. I do think it's always important though. And, in your situation, you're talking about someone that is in a Uniscope model, perhaps considering a place that does not have a Uniscope model. I think the converse would always also be important. You always want to make sure that you're crafting is what you're doing with a job application is no different than me as a dean asking for a new faculty line. I always want to craft that request in the preferred language of the person who is going to read it and make the decision. So, I would always, if you're at a Uniscope university and considering an opportunity, your cover letter is basically your grant application, your proposal to them for you to go work for them. You want to make sure that it is crafted in a way that they're going to be able to receive it and understand it and appreciate it. So I would recommend that you tell your own story, but tell it in a way that is going to resonate with the reader as they look at that cover letter and see how and help them start to envision how the addition of your talent to their program is going to help take them to the next level.
And I would, I agree with Damon, and I would say too, especially if you're going in from not going in as an entry level person, but maybe moving into like an associate or full, your vita is going to be evaluated based on the criteria at that institution. So, just along those lines, making sure that you understand what those rank positions require at the institution for that you're applying to, but it sounds very much like a lot of the same criteria we're asking for. For example, we're a Carnegie community engaged institution, so we're working on how do we value that community engagement scholarship. And so I think we're all looking for ways, and as Damon said, like with that North Carolina state, that we're all looking ways to value what our institution's mission is. And, so those are the things same kind of things we would be looking for. So I think, again, just making sure it's a good fit for the institution that you're applying to. Any other questions? How about the students?
I'll ask a question. So I'm Chelsea. I'm a third-year doc student at the University of Louisville. I'm currently working on my dissertation, so hoping to graduate in May of this year. Currently on the job market. So my question for all of you is, what's the best advice you can give to somebody who is going on the job market, going through the interview process, particularly in this environment where interviews are completely virtual and you don't get that experience on campus anymore as you have in the past?
We're in the process right now, Chelsea. In fact, today, I think we interviewed the last of 4 finalists that we had for sport analytics position and sport management, but then we have other positions that have been going forward during this environment. I think it's, the Zoom interviews has kind of made things interesting. I think one positive that I've seen from it is the search committees seem to be more willing to have a much larger semifinalist pool and before they get to a finalist pool. And so there have been some candidates that maybe on paper wouldn't have made a traditional semifinalist pool that are now making that. And then I've had, one search committee come forward with 5. I mean, normally we have 3 finalists for a position. I've had one search committee come forward with 5. Another couple have come forward with 4. So they're giving more candidates an opportunity to be able to interview. I think it's very challenging in a Zoom environment to find ways to instantly connect with those that you're interviewing with. But I find that it's even more important in a Zoom environment where you don't have the meal opportunities where you're sitting with everyone and those informal aspects of the interview that really, a lot of times it's those elements that help the committee and the candidate determine whether or not they're a good fit for the institution. So my recommendation when you get to that point is to really go into extra overdrive of analyzing every single person that you're going to be. I mean, maybe even ask in advance when you get some type of an agenda for your interview, making sure that you get a list of all the names of the people that are going to be there and what their titles are, so that you can go online, look at their CVs, look at their bios, and see if there's some unique things. Maybe, you and one of the search committee members are both into bowling or something. I don't know, but finding some way to be able to make that connection is very, very important. If you come in and are very robotic and just answer the questions and so forth, I think you're at a disadvantage in this environment. So I think it's almost important to be, hyper aggressive in terms of how your personality comes across. Smile more often, be more engaging and interactive. Try to be even more extroverted maybe than what you normally are, because it's that brief moment in time that you're going to have. You're going to have to basically pile in all the good times that you would normally have at the meals and other types of events, and put it into a more structured format where you're going to be meeting with your students, faculty, search committee, giving a presentation and everything else.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add to that, Chelsea, I mentioned this in a session yesterday, is just that teaching component. Just remember that in a virtual environment, so which is maybe your comfort zone, maybe not. So I would make sure you practice that type of delivery, so that when you're being evaluated for your teaching, which is especially, it's a really important component at our institution, that you're able to teach and demonstrate your effectiveness as an instructor in that Zoom world, right? So that can be a little challenging if you're not used to it. So I would just say, make sure you prepare for that type of teaching, because they won't be able to see you standing in front of a group of students and what that engagement looks like. So just ensure that you've done your homework on that.